Kings chapter 8. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of all the ancestral houses of the Israelites, before King Solomon in Jerusalem to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion. All of the people of Israel assembled to King Solomon at the festival in the month of Ethanim, which is the 7th month. And all of the elders of Israel came, and the priests carried the ark. So they brought up the ark of the Lord, the tent of meeting, and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. The priests and the Levites brought them up. King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who had assembled before him were with him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and oxen that they could not be counted or numbered. Then the priests brought the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, in the most holy place, underneath the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim spread out their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubim made a covering above the ark and its poles. The poles were so long that the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen from outside. They are there to this day. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone that Moses had placed there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites when they came out of the land of Egypt, and when the priests came out of the holy place. A cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Then Solomon said, "The Lord has said that he would dwell in thick darkness. I have built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell in forever." Then the king turned around and blessed the assembly of Israel. While all the assembly of Israel stood, he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his hand has fulfilled what he promised with his mouth to my father David, saying, since the day that I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city from any of the tribes of Israel in which to build a house, that my name might be there. But I choose David to be over my people Israel. My father David had it in mind to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, you did well to consider building a house for my name. Nevertheless, you shall not build the house, but your son, who shall be born to you, shall build the house for my name. Now the Lord has upheld the promise that he made, for I have risen in the place of my father David. I sit on the throne of my father David, as the Lord promised, and have built the house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. There I have provided a place for the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord that he made with our ancestors when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. Sometimes you open up the lectionary and it is exactly what you need for the moment. For this story comes to us as we spend some of our last moments in worship in this space, a temporary space, preparing to move into a new worship space as we're primed for a new day of worship and ministry together. And so I believe that this passage can be a helpful guide for us in these coming days and weeks. 1 Kings 8 is actually this sweeping 60-plus verse chapter that talks about this long dedication of the temple itself before the Lord. And so I invite you to spend these next weeks exploring all of these verses with me as we hear the words of Solomon presiding over the ceremony of worship. Let us learn from Scriptures from what's called one of the wisest men in the Bible. And let this be our guide to wisdom and vision as we prepare our hearts to move forward toward what God is calling us to be. So the first phrase that I want us to take a look at is one found in verse 6. It says that the priests brought the Ark of the Covenant into the temple. Now, the passage opens with this description of the Ark of the Covenant. It's actually a helpful kind of follow-up from last week's sermon. Those of you who were here last week heard a narrative about the Ark. It took place before this event, actually long before this event, in which David brought the Ark into Jerusalem for the very first time. You heard that narrative of the new king bringing the Ark in to its place. The victorious King David knew that the Ark would bring legitimacy to the eyes, in the eyes of his people. And so now King Solomon, these many years later, his son is doing the same thing. He's bringing the Ark into the temple, bringing legitimacy to his rule. But I want to pause and study that phenomena for a minute. I want to look at exactly what the ark had to share. The Ark of the Covenant was this powerful religious symbol. It held the manna that God rained down from heaven, proving that God shared his provision with the people. It held the staff of Aaron that budded, proving that God was powerful even over nature. And it held the very tablets of the 10 Commandments, the covenant of the Lord, proving that God was in covenant with his people. But one of the important symbols of the ark that's sometimes unnoticed in the ark story are the poles on the side of the ark itself. I referenced those last week in the sermon because I think they're an important symbol for what God is really about. For when you see that the ark was designed to be moved, there's a powerful theological statement there. That is, that God is not a static God. God is on the move. From the earliest tabernacle, a tent that was designed to move from place to place, into this transportation of the ark into the temple, and then even beyond when the exile took place, and the people of God had to ask, well, where is God when the temple is gone? There's this understanding that the presence of God is not a static one, but a dynamic one. God is on the move, and the Spirit of God is not meant to be trapped inside a box, literal or figurative. The Spirit of God is open and beyond our trappings. Chun Young Sao says it this way: God's rule is not tied to one locale. God is transcendent and free of human manipulation. The existence of any sanctuary is a concrete representation of the possibility of God's presence amid a community of worship. But God's freedom transcends any building made by human hands, or any structure, or any institution, for that matter. And so, as we prepare to make a move into the new sanctuary, we do well to remember these words from 1 Kings. After all, it will be easy to enter this new space and then assume, well, we can now just relax. But just as our God is on the move, our faith is on the move. Our faith is not static either. It is dynamic as well. Our faith demands that we put the poles into the rings of the ark, and we go. You know, I get nervous whenever I hear somebody talking about our new sanctuary in terms like, well, once we build it, they will come. Because it sure sounds like the building itself is going to do the work of evangelism that we have been called to do. Instead, I would suggest that our motto ought to be, well, we have built it, now let's go. Let's go into our community, invite them into our worship space, now free of so many hurdles to hospitality. Let's go into the world with a renewed sense of purpose and vision because we have gathered here for worship, because we are now sent out with a new sense of purpose and vision. Let's go into our surrounding neighborhood with a sense of love and grace to share God's story. Last Sunday, I offered a specific prayer for many of those here in our neighborhood surrounding the church, including Sunset Hill Elementary, in the midst of a construction time of their own that has forced them to meet in another location. During the week, one of you shared with the administration that the school had been in our prayers. And a few days ago, I received a phone message from the principal thanking us for our prayers. She said the transition is going well, as can be expected, but our continued prayers would be appreciated. Our witness made a difference in the community, in our own neighborhood. Our faith demands that we go, that we do more than sit and stare at our new building. Our calling to be and live and serve in our community still lies in front of us. Just like the ark of old, our God and our faith are dynamic. Together with God, we are on the move. There's another paragraph that stands out to me from this passage that I think relates to us and what we are in the midst of. And when the priests came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Then Solomon said, "The Lord has said that he would dwell in thick darkness." A few years ago, I decided that I was going to go watch the Perseid meteor showers in August. Many of you know it's one of the most stunning and showy meteor showers of the whole year. But it is best seen at like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So I planned everything out. I went to bed early. I set my alarm. I got up at 2 in the morning and I went outside to see a sky full of clouds. Nothing, not a single meteor. I'm sure they were up there. I just couldn't see any of them. I hate clouds. I can't tell you how many mountaintops I've climbed to the top of only to be in the middle of a cloud. How many starry nights were ruined by clouds? How many cloudy days have put a damper on my plans? Clouds are horrible. Who likes clouds? Apparently, God does. Because throughout Scripture, the symbol of the cloud is used to signify the glory of the Lord again and again. The pillar of cloud that led the Israelites out of Egypt. The smoke-filled throne room in Isaiah's vision of calling. Mount Sinai enveloped as Moses went into the cloud to speak to God. Again and again, instead of bright sun, instead of beautiful stars, instead of spectacular views, nothing but clouds. And now here in 1 Kings, we see clouds again making an appearance. Here is this perfect moment that I'm sure Solomon and all of those gathered were all excited about, ready to see. Here we are, here is this moment. And what happens? Clouds. God fills the temple with cloudy darkness. But it is Solomon in his wisdom who pauses and says, well, the Lord has said that he would dwell in thick darkness. It's a wisdom that Barbara Brown Taylor echoes in her book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. She says this: those of us who wish to draw near to God should not be surprised if our vision goes cloudy. For this is a sign that we are approaching the opaque splendor of God. If we decide to keep going beyond the point where our eyes or minds are of any help to us, we may finally arrive at the pinnacle of the spiritual journey toward God, which exists in complete and dazzling darkness. Barbara Brown Taylor explains that it is only in the darkness, in the obscurity, that we can really see God at work. Otherwise, our eyes deceive us and make us think that we are truly the masters of the world around us. At this dedication of the temple, even in that moment of triumph, God obscured the vision of the people. It was not the clarity of accomplishment, of perfection, of finally measuring up to all these other countries who have had their own kings and their own gods and their own temples and their own palaces. Instead, it was the smoke-filled room of God's glory that ruled the day. Solomon's wisdom reminds them that they must not simply dedicate the building, but dedicate their eyes. Dedicate their vision to seeing what God is truly about. What only God can show them. Let us hear this point about our new space. When we gather together and celebrate the fact that we can finally be in a new place of worship, we worship God together in powerful ways. I believe God's glory will be evident, for it is a beautiful space that evokes the very Spirit of God just by walking into it. I look forward to the first moment of worship together there, and for many moments, for many years. However, we may and we must remember that it is not our plans, it is not our accomplishment, it is not our triumph that causes us to celebrate, but the very power of God and God Himself. That is above our understanding, that is above our knowing, that is above even our seeing, that causes us to celebrate. May we have eyes to see beyond our own accomplishment. A final phrase from this morning's passage that might help us during our time of transition. Now the Lord has upheld the promise that He made. Even though I preached about it just last week, David's move of the ark into Jerusalem happened a long, long time before today's passage took place. David reigned in Jerusalem for 33 years. And then Solomon took over, and it took 4 years before he began to build the temple. And then it took 7 years to actually construct the building. And then they waited another year before they dedicated it. You thought we had to wait a long time. 1 Kings tells us that the Lord upheld the promise. But it didn't happen as quickly as some would have hoped. We get it, don't we? 2 years ago, our church entered a difficult chapter. Exactly 2 years ago, many of us were donning work gloves to yank carpet out of our sanctuary. A few weeks earlier, we had received the report from professional mold testing, and it was not good. Years of water damage from a leaky foundation and roof had created a mold problem with readings off the charts. We had to immediately stop using parts of the building and begin tearing out carpet throughout. Remediation ran our total construction bill beyond our original planning. It ran our timeline past the period of slow construction during the recession into the busyness of the economic recovery. Thus, our designers and builders suddenly busier schedules, as well as our own need to reevaluate our scope and vision, as well as the reality of, well, construction just takes longer than you think it will. We're still worshiping in the gym. But today I want to show you a piece of paper. This permit card has been hanging on the front of our sanctuary for many months now. But today, everything's checked off. And next Sunday, we will be able to worship in our new worship space. We will be able to go home. For that joy and that hope, let us celebrate and praise God. For it has been a long time coming. It has been a difficult process. It has been a tough chapter. But next week, we continue to listen for God's voice in a new and significant way. Now, there's still going to be some transition. It's still not going to be perfect. We must still meet with the contractors for a final run-through, and then we have to move everything over, and then, well, we have to figure out the sound, and we have to figure out the organ has to be tuned, and we have to do a lot of other things still. The tech team met a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was Ann Johnson that had the line of the night. She said, well, it's just like when you move into your house for the first time. You put your utensils into a drawer in the kitchen thinking this is where they'll go, but then you actually start to cook and realize that's not where they should go at all. And so there'll be some transition, some moving around, some adjusting, a few different configurations. We'll experiment with a few different drawers. We'll readjust the media with this new space and new lighting, and soon we'll get it figured out. We'll be ready for an official dedication. But my point today is this. Well, 2 points actually. One, at least it didn't take us 7 years. And two, and this is the big one, now the Lord has upheld his promise that he made. Just like with Solomon and the Israelites, it takes patience and perseverance to see what God is doing. We are constantly reminded that it is not our time, but it is God's time. But even with the chaos of the last couple of years, I want you to hear this loud and clear. God is faithful. The prayers that we began saying over 5 years ago have been answered, and now it is time to celebrate. But it's a helpful reminder that it takes eyes to see what God is really doing. No doubt some of the Israelites looked at the bare spot that David promised would one day be a temple for years and generations and said, well, I'll believe it when I see it. But others, with patience and perseverance, saw what could be, saw what God was doing and what God would do. That is the way God calls us to see. The way that God invites us to look at the world. Don't look at what you see, but look at what I made, God says. Don't look at the present, but look at what can be made in the future. Don't look at the limitations, but look at my potential. The words of our final hymn today speak words of vision and hope in the midst of transition. Open my eyes that I may see glimpses of truth thou hast for me. Place in my hands the wonderful key that shall unclasp and set me free. Silently now I wait for thee, ready, my God, thy will to see. Open my eyes, illumine me, Spirit divine. May it be so.